What do the ink of a fleeing squid, the peel of a brown banana, and, well, your absolute inability to stop scrolling on your phone have in common?
Yeah, it sounds like the setup to a really weird joke.
Right. But they are all actually driven by the exact same molecule. And if you're someone who loves learning how things work, you probably think you know this molecule pretty well.
You know it as the pleasure chemical.
Exactly. I mean, we are constantly being told by self-help articles and like pop psychology videos how to hack our dopamine.
Or how you need to go on a dopamine fast to reset your brain.
Mm.
It's essentially become this cultural shorthand for happiness or, instant gratification.
Yeah, but today we are going to look at the hard science and prove why basically everything pop culture has taught you about dopamine is completely wrong.
It's a pretty massive paradigm shift.
It really is. Our source material for this deep dive is a comprehensive, heavily cited Wikipedia article all about dopamine.
Yeah.
It is incredibly dense, just packed with biochemistry.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot to get through.
So our mission today is to rebuild a true, accurate understanding of what this molecule actually does. Because by the end of this deep dive, you'll understand how dopamine literally links the architecture of artificial intelligence to human motivation.
And why it is operating inside your kidneys right at this very second.
Right. It's a remarkable journey. We're talking about a molecule that essentially shaped the evolution of behavior across millions of years, far beyond just human beings.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start with the biggest misconception, right? The absolute core of the myth.
Yes. The source explicitly states that in modern pharmacology, dopamine is not considered the chemical of pleasure at all.
Right. Instead, it confers something called motivational salience.
Motivational salience.
Yes. That phrase is literally the key to everything here. So in neuropsychology, there's a framework called the incentive salience model,
Okay.
and it separates our response to a reward into two entirely different neurologically distinct components. First, there is wanting.
Like the drive or the craving.
Exactly, the approach behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And second, there is liking, which is the actual consummatory behavior.
Yeah.
The hedonic pleasure you feel when you finally get the thing.
I was trying to visualize this while reading the source, and I came up with an analogy to separate the two. Tell me if this works.
Let's hear it.
So, dopamine isn't the feeling of actually eating a delicious, perfectly cooked meal.
Right.
Dopamine is the feeling of intensely staring at the menu before you order. It's the anticipation. It's the hunger, the drive, the wanting rather than the liking.
That is an excellent analogy, and scientifically accurate, too. Dopamine propels the organism toward an outcome. It is the engine of desire, not the reward itself.
But wait, if dopamine is just the engine of desire, how does that explain addiction? Because, I mean, we always hear about dopamine hits keeping people addicted to drugs.
Yeah, that's a really common point of confusion.
If they aren't getting pleasure from it, why do they keep doing it?
That is exactly where that incentive salience model is so crucial. What's fascinating and, well, really tragic, is what happens when those two systems, the wanting and the liking, become decoupled.
Decoupled, like they start working together.
Right. When someone repeatedly takes addictive drugs, especially psychostimulants, the dopamine system in a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens becomes highly sensitized.
Okay, so it gets hypersensitive.
Exactly. The wanting essentially skyrockets. The incentive salience is dialed up to a pathological level, which leads to compulsive drug-seeking behavior.
So the craving just gets stronger and stronger.
Yes, but simultaneously, because of neurological tolerance, the actual liking, the pleasure derived from consuming the drug actually decreases.
Oh, wow.
So the person is driven by this overwhelming dopamine-fueled imperative to seek out something that doesn't even feel good to them anymore.
That is terrifying.
Their brain is basically screaming, you must get this to survive, even as the reward itself diminishes.
That is such a profound distinction. And there was an experiment detailed in the text that practically proves the separation between desire and pleasure.
Oh, the animal studies.
Yeah. Researchers looked at animals where the dopamine systems in their brains had been rendered completely inactive. And these animals wouldn't seek out food at all. They had zero motivation.
Right. If left to themselves, they would literally starve to death.
Which is wild. And this is the crazy part, if the researchers placed food directly into the mouths of these dopamine-depleted animals, they would eat it, and they would actually show facial expressions indicative of pleasure.
So they still had the capacity to like the food.
Exactly. They just didn't have the dopamine required to want it enough to walk across the cage and get it.
It completely shatters the idea that dopamine equals pleasure. Now, to be precise, We shouldn't swing the pendulum entirely in the other direction and say it has absolutely zero relationship to pleasure.
Right, because it's still involved in some aspects.
Yes, particularly with abstract rewards,
Hmm.
like music, for example.
Yeah, the source mentions a clinical study from January 2019 that looked at that. Specifically, that feeling of getting chills or frisson when you hear an amazing crescendo in a song.
I love that study.
Me too. So researchers manipulated human subjects' dopamine levels using two things. First, levodopa, which is a dopamine precursor that boosts dopamine. And second, risperidone, which is a dopamine antagonist that blocks it.
Correct. And when they boosted the dopamine system, the pleasure and emotional arousal from the music increased.
But when they blocked it,
When they blocked it with the antagonist, the subject's ability to experience musical pleasure was severely impaired. The text actually describes dopamine as a sine qua non, an absolutely indispensable condition for the hedonic impact of music.
so it's totally required to enjoy the music, but music isn't a survival necessity like food. It's an abstract goal.
Exactly. Dopamine's role is heavily tied to goal-oriented action, which, by the way, is why a 1998 study published in the journal Nature found something similar with video games.
Oh, the tank game study.
Yeah. When human subjects played a video game involving goal-directed motor tasks, PET scans showed dopamine just flooding their striatum. And the better they performed the task, the more dopamine was released.
Okay, so if dopamine is the engine of motivation driving us toward our goals, how does it actually learn what to want?
What do you mean?
Well, because if it's just blindly pushing us forward, we'd never learn from our mistakes, right? How does the brain do the math to figure out what is a good goal and what isn't?
Ah, okay. This brings us to one of the most elegant mechanisms in all of biology. It's a hypothesis proposed by scientists Montague, Dion, and Sednowski called the reward prediction error signal.
Reward prediction error. Okay.
The core idea here is that dopamine doesn't just fire when you get a reward. It fires based on whether the reward matches your expectations.
Wait, hang on. If I know I'm getting my paycheck on Friday, I still feel pretty good when the money hits my bank account.
Sure.
Are you saying my brain doesn't care just because I expected it?
It's not that your brain doesn't care. It's about what the dopamine is trying to teach your brain. Think of your brain as an accountant, right?
Huh?
Constantly updating a spreadsheet of expectations.
Okay, tracking the spreadsheet.
Let's say you buy your usual morning coffee for $5. You expect it to cost $5. When they charge you $5, there's no spike in your synaptic dopamine.
Because it's perfectly in line with my spreadsheet.
Exactly. Your baseline dopamine keeps you moving, but there's no sudden surge because your brain's model of the world was perfectly accurate. No update is needed.
Okay, I follow that.
Now, imagine you go in and the barista says, "Hey, coffee is on the house today." That is an unexpected reward.
Best day ever.
Right. Suddenly, there is a short-lasting, massive spike in synaptic dopamine, a positive prediction error.
Oh, I see.
This surge tells your brain, pay attention. Whatever you just did to get free coffee, memorize it and do it again.
And what if the opposite happens? Like, what if I go in and suddenly the coffee is $10?
Then you get a sharp dip. The dopamine release drops momentarily below its background level.
A negative prediction error.
Exactly. That omission of an expected reward creates a negative error, teaching your brain, okay, that action didn't pay off as expected. Let's devalue this coffee shop in our spreadsheet. It is a continuous mathematical feedback loop of updating expectations.
So if our brain is constantly running this calculus of expectation versus reality, it sounds less like biology and more like programming.
That is a very astute connection, because computer scientists and computational neuroscientists lifted this exact logic for artificial intelligence.
Seriously.
Yes, an incredibly influential machine learning method called temporal difference learning makes heavy use of a signal that encodes prediction error.
Okay, explain temporal difference learning to me like I'm 5. How does a computer use dopamine logic?
Sure. Imagine you're trying to train a virtual robotic dog to navigate a digital maze. You don't program every single step it should take.
Right, that would take forever.
Instead, you let it wander, and you give it a digital algorithm that acts just like dopamine. If the robot dog accidentally discovers a shortcut to the end of the maze and unexpected reward, the algorithm sends a mathematical spike, a positive error signal.
Got it. Which reinforces that path.
Yes, it reinforces the exact sequence of digital steps the dog just took. If it hits a dead end, it gets a negative error signal, reducing the probability of taking that path again.
That is mind-blowing.
The way we train AI agents to master complex tasks, like playing chess or navigating environments, is a direct mathematical mirror of the dopamine firing patterns in the human brain.
That is just wild, the exact same mechanism. But, here's a detail from the text that I found genuinely puzzling.
What's that?
For a chemical that controls human motivation, our response to music, and is the theoretical basis for AI learning, there actually isn't that much of it in the brain.
You're referring to the actual neuron count.
Yes. The text notes that these dopaminergic neurons, the specialized nerve cells that actually produce dopamine, were first mapped back in 1964 by researchers Annika Dahlstrom and K.F. Fuchs.
Right.
And in the entire human brain, there are only about 400,000 of them. Out of the roughly 86 billion neurons we have, just 400,000 are dopamine producing.
It's tiny.
Yeah, they're confined to a few small, tight clusters in the midbrain, like the ventral tegmental area and the substantia nigra.
It is a remarkably small number, but those 400,000 neurons project their axons out to many other areas of the brain, exerting a massive structural influence.
Okay.
And this explains the second major function of dopamine within the central nervous system, which is physical movement.
Movement, like physically walking around.
Yes, the basal ganglia is a major structure in the brain involved in action selection, basically deciding which physical movement to execute from a menu of possible behaviors. Dopamine acts as the threshold for initiating these physical actions.
So how does that threshold work in practice?
Think of dopamine as the grease in the gears of your motor system. If you have high levels of dopamine activity, the impetus required to evoke a physical behavior is lowered.
The gears turn easily.
Exactly. You get high levels of motor activity, vigorous physical reactions, sometimes even impulsivity. But if dopamine levels are low, the grease dries up. Reactions slow down, leading to physical torpor or severe stiffness.
So if dopamine is the grease in the gears of our motor system, what happens when the factory producing that grease shuts down?
Wow.
Because that is exactly the mechanical failure we see in Parkinson's disease, according to the source.
Precisely. Parkinson's is caused specifically by the death of those dopamine-secreting neurons in the substantia nigra.
So the factory dies.
Yes. When a large percentage of those 400,000 neurons die off, the brain's dopamine levels plummet. The motor system loses its grease, resulting in the stiffness, tremors, and severe difficulty initiating movement that characterizes the disease.
Which brings up a massive biological hurdle in treating Parkinson's. Because if a patient is lacking dopamine, the obvious common sense solution is to just give them a dopamine pill.
Or inject pure dopamine into their bloodstream, yeah.
Right. But doctors can't do that.
No, they can't. And that's because of the blood-brain barrier.
Right. The way I pictured this while reading is that the brain has a heavily armed, incredibly strict bouncer at the door, and dopamine is simply not on the VIP list.
That's a great way to put it.
No matter how much is circulating in your blood, the bouncer will not let it cross the barrier into the brain. So to get it inside, it has to be smuggled in wearing a disguise.
And in modern pharmacology, that disguise is L-DOP.
Exactly. L-dopia is a metabolic precursor to dopamine. The bouncer at the blood-brain barrier looks at L-DOP and says, yeah, you're on the approved list. Go on in.
And once L-DOPA successfully crosses that barrier and is inside the brain, it meets an enzyme called DOPP decarboxylase.
Which takes off the disguise.
Exactly. This enzyme essentially strips away the disguise, converting the LDOPA back into active dopamine, right where the brain needs it. That is why levodopa remains the most widely used and effective treatment for Parkinson's.
But this raises a huge question for me. If we have dopamine circulating in our bloodstream naturally, but the bouncer won't let it cross into the brain, what is it doing out there in the rest of the body?
That's a really good point.
We think of it so strictly as a brain chemical, but it's clearly working all over the place.
It is deeply involved in our peripheral organs. Outside the central nervous system, dopamine functions mostly as a local paracrine messenger.
Paracrine messenger, meaning what?
This means it's synthesized locally and exerts its effects right near the cells that release it, doing completely different jobs depending on the organ. Let's look at the kidneys, for example.
Okay.
In your kidneys right now, dopamine is increasing the blood supply, increasing the filtration rate, and increasing the excretion of sodium in your urine.
So it's basically a localized sodium regulator.
Yes. And defects in this renal dopamine function can lead to reduced sodium excretion, which is strongly linked to the development of high blood pressure.
Oh, wow.
Now move over to the pancreas. The pancreas synthesizes insulin, but the beta cells there have dopamine receptors. When dopamine acts on them, it actually reduces the amount of insulin they produce.
What about the immune system? The text mentioned it interacts with lymphocytes, our white blood cells. So is dopamine out there boosting our immune response?
Actually, it's the exact opposite. Dopamine acts on receptors present on these lymphocytes, and its main effect is to reduce their activation level.
Wait, it suppresses them.
Yes, it acts as an inhibitor, so it's essentially acting as a localized, independent manager across all these different bodily systems, completely separated from the dopamine acting in your brain.
And while we're talking about the rest of the body, there was a detail regarding our digestive system that I found fascinating.
Oh, the dopamine sulfate.
Yes. The text states that in humans, over 95% of the dopamine circulating in our blood plasma is actually in a deactivated form called dopamine sulfate.
Right, it's a conjugate produced by an enzyme acting on free dopamine.
And where does this dopamine sulfate come from?
The text says it's basically a detoxified form of dopamine that we ingested directly from our food.
Yep, dietary dopamine.
After you eat a meal, the levels of dopamine sulfate in your plasma can rise 50-fold. And it has no known biological function, it just circulates harmlessly until it's excreted in the urine.
It's an incredible defense mechanism. The digestive system rapidly processes and sulfates environmental dopamine to prevent a massive, dangerous spike of active dopamine in your bloodstream every time you eat certain foods.
But hold on, if we are eating dopamine, that means plants are manufacturing it.
They are.
Which made me zoom way, way out while reading this source. Just how universal is this chemical across life on Earth? To understand that, we have to look at the deep evolutionary roots of dopamine. This isn't just a human chemical or even a mammalian one. Dopamine has been used as a neurotransmitter for over 500 million years.
500 million.
We can trace its emergence all the way back to the Cambrian period, roughly when the earliest nervous systems were forming.
So it's foundational to almost all life.
Absolutely. It functions as a neurotransmitter in almost all multicellular animals.
Wow.
We see it in radially symmetric species like jellyfish.
Jellyfish have dopamine.
Oh yeah. We see it in flatworms, where dopamine specifically produces these screw-like bodily movements. In the microscopic roundworm C. elegans, dopamine actually reduces their general locomotion, but increases their localized food exploratory movements.
So it tells them to stop wandering and start eating.
Exactly. In leeches, dopamine actively inhibits swimming and promotes crawling.
And I have to mention my favorite animal fact from the text. Dopamine is even found in cephalopod ink.
Yes.
The ink that squids shoot out to escape predators contains dopamine. It is literally everywhere.
It truly is. Which brings us back to your realization about plants. Many plants synthesize dopamine to varying degrees using biochemical mechanisms that are remarkably similar to the ones animals use.
The plant data in the text is wild. Bananas are absolutely packed with it. The source specifically notes that the fruit pulp and the peels of red and yellow bananas contain dopamine at levels of 40 to 50 parts per million by weight.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Potatoes, avocados, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and they all have it. And plants like velvet beans and fava beans contain massive amounts of L-Dopa, that precursor we talked about earlier.
They do.
But why? I mean, a banana doesn't have a brain, it doesn't have a motor system or a reward prediction error. Do plants feel desire?
No, they don't feel desire.
Yeah.
Functions of plant catecholamines like dopamine aren't entirely about neurotransmission. There's strong evidence they play a role in responding to physical stressors, like bacterial infections, or modifying how sugars are metabolized.
Oh, so they just repurposed it.
Exactly. They repurpose the molecule for completely different biological needs.
The text highlighted one specific marine green algae called Ulvaria obscura that uses it in a really dramatic way.
Yes. In that specific algae, dopamine makes up a staggering 4.4% of its entire dry weight.
4.4% of a plant is just pure dopamine. How is that even possible?
It's a really extreme evolutionary adaptation. Researchers believe that in this specific case, the algae uses dopamine as a powerful chemical defense against herbivores.
A defense mechanism.
Right. When snails or marine isopods try to consume the algae, the sheer concentration of dopamine acts as a deterrent, reducing consumption and saving the algae.
Hang on, let me just wrap my head around this. So the exact same chemical that makes a human addicted to a slot machine and helps a robotic dog learn a maze is being heavily manufactured by sea algae just to gross out snails.
Precisely. It is a masterclass in evolutionary repurposing. Nature finds a stable, useful molecule and adapts it for a million different jobs across hundreds of millions of years.
That is amazing.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the evolutionary story gets even richer. Because dopamine doesn't just act as a transmitter, a hormone, or a defense chemical, it is structurally closely related to melanin.
Melanin, as in the pigment.
Yes, When dopamine is oxidized via an enzyme called tyrosinase, it creates a specific type of melanin known as dopamine melanin.
I had no idea.
Now, to be clear, the melanin that darkens human skin isn't this exact type. Our melanin uses L-duopia as a precursor, but bypasses dopamine itself. However, there's substantial evidence that the dark color of the substantia nigra in our brains.
The very area where those 400,000 dopamine neurons live.
Exactly. That dark hue is given by neuromelanin, which is, at least in part, dopamine melanin.
Wow. So to summarize this journey we've been on with you today, we started with a massive cultural myth about a pleasure chemical.
A myth we thoroughly debunked.
Right. We dismantled that, discovering that dopamine is actually the brain's ultimate engine for anticipation, craving, and motivational salience. We explored its mathematical precision in reward prediction errors and how it acts as the necessary grease for human movement in the basal ganglia.
Not to mention its work in the periphery.
Yeah. We tracked its hidden life as a local manager in our kidneys, pancreas, and immune systems. And finally, we followed it all the way out of the human body, finding it in sea sponges, leech nervous systems, squid ink, and the peels of bananas.
A single chemical thread weaving through the entire tapestry of life on Earth.
And for all of you listening, I want to leave you with one final awe-inspiring image directly from the text to ponder on your own. We just mentioned dopamine melanin. Well, researchers believe that this exact same molecule, the one that drives a human toward addiction, the one that helps a Parkinson's patient initiate a single step, the one whose mathematics literally train artificial intelligence algorithms, is also the literal pigment that paints the complex, beautiful patterns on butterfly wings and the black and white stripes on the bodies of insect larvae.
It really is beautiful when you think about it.
The next time you feel a sudden rush of motivation or you find yourself intensely staring at a menu, I hope you remember how deeply connected you are to the natural world around you. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. See you next time.